Good morning, CLC. Welcome to a wonderful Sunday. I hope you're having a glorious day today. We're happy that you joined us. We're happy that you're here. And I welcome you in joining us in saying, Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all the good I am and have, all the good I give and receive. I am prosperous now, and so it is. And now, I invite you to take a few deep breaths. Relax your body. Relax your mind. Put your day and your week aside. Everything that you have coming up, just let that go for now. Breathe in the cool, crisp air, and breathe out all that no longer serves you. Universal love enfolds me. Universal wisdom inspires me. Universal spirit enlightens me. Universal power encircles me. I am one and all is well. As we begin the inner healing process, let me invite you to relax in quiet confidence, opening yourself to the miracle-working higher power. Now symbolize the unity of your thinking and feeling nature by touching your chest with your right hand, and let my words act as your own for your own inner healing, acceptance, and receptivity. I acknowledge that there is a power, intelligence, and wisdom greater than my own. I am in the midst of it, and it is in the midst of me, sensitive and responsive to my every thought, word, action, and feeling. I now make this true for myself by saying aloud, I acknowledge. Acknowledging the power working through my life, I admit that I am personally responsible for solving my own problems while being guided and assisted by something greater than myself. As I am ready to surrender the conflicts of my ego to the wisdom of the infinite presence, I simply speak these words: I surrender. Knowing that forgiveness is the key to unconditional love and the feeling of heaven, I now unconditionally forgive anyone and everyone who has ever injured me in any way, real or imagined. And I now forgive myself for all my mistaken judgments and their resulting actions. From my deepest level of understanding, I now say, I forgive. Realizing that I continually experience the effects of my own thinking, I now choose to allow this higher power to recreate me deeply, filling my mind with thoughts that are only constructive, positive, loving, and beautiful. I now call upon this divine inflow by stating aloud, I choose. I now center upon that one special idea that I'm willing to accept as real for me in this coming week. Visualizing that idea as already acted upon and brought to pass. In seeing my idea become a fact of my experience, I enjoy the happiness and peace of my thought fulfilled and gratefully speak these words: I accept. Knowing that I have an everlasting place in the midst of the power that sustains all creation, as well as the support of all those around me, I allow myself to relax in the peace of fulfillment and gratitude and say, I release. Now, in my mind's eye, I envision the presence of someone near and dear to me. This could be a friend, a family member, a teacher or mentor, someone who has touched my life in deep and loving ways. Someone who may not be physically present in the room with me this morning. I turn toward that image in my mind's eye and say, I am grateful for the good in your life. I now open my eyes and turn to the world around me and speak joyfully to anyone who is in the room or virtually on this broadcast and share in gratitude and confidence and say, I am grateful for the good in all of your lives.
Good morning, Creative Life. When I gave my first Sunday talk in December of 1977 in a different venue, I was terrified. And if they had filmed me, I'd have fainted. And if they'd filmed me live to the world, I would have fainted dead away. I'm here this morning to introduce our speaker, who is hardly a guest. You know her well. The first time she spoke on a Sunday, which is a very big deal for practitioners and ministers, we in this teaching, a Sunday talk, it's a bigger deal to us than it is to the congregation, you know, because it's like our life's work is coming to this sort of apex moment. Well, the first time that the Reverend Lisa Ryan spoke here on Sunday was on March the 13th. Wasn't it the 13th or 15th? Somewhere in there. Anyway, it was the last Sunday that we had a congregation present, and it was the first Sunday that we went to Facebook Live. And to give your very first talk, and I told some students in the School of Ministry that I worked with over the weekend about what you did, and they all gasped. To have it be your first talk and to have it go live to the world is pretty remarkable. I was not here to introduce her that day. I was out of town, so today I absolutely have to. And you know her well. You've seen her every Sunday here on this stage for the past 6 months plus. You know her as our social media manager. You know her as our teen advisor, one of our teen advisors. She's everywhere doing everything. She's at the food events. She's helping out in so many different ways. She is beloved, and she's homegrown too. Here, had all her classwork, her practitioner license, and all right here at Creative Life. It gives me great joy to present for your listening pleasure this morning, the Reverend Lisa Ryan.
Well, I guess now I have to be good. We'll see. Couple of weeks ago, I guess it would have been over a month ago, one of Jesse's talks gave me an idea for a talk. I jot down titles, and then I'll write a talk around the title. And the title that sprung to me was, "What if there is no them?" And I find it ironic that I chose that title and then went, okay, now what am I going to do with that? And then, since I do the daily readings out of the 365 SOM, September is the month of expectancy. And a whole lot of his, especially in the last week, and I know this is going to be an Emma Curtis Hopkins thing. If you talk about yellow elephants, you're going to see yellow elephants. So I'm thinking about what if there's no them. So in the last week, all of the daily guides have been about there is no them. Maybe it's because it's in my head. But the other thing that I thought about was, and this blew me away because I didn't realize when I had this class. 7 years ago, and I can't believe it because it feels like yesterday and it feels like 100 years ago. I took a class called Metaphysical Bible 1. And in that class, we got to choose a book from the Hebrew Testament. because that Metaphysical Bible 1 is on the Hebrew Testament and Metaphysical Bible 2 is on the Christian Testament. So I chose Esther because I always loved the book. And what I loved, okay, let's be honest, I like the strong female characters. So of course I loved Esther. I also love Ruth. I love Mary and Martha. Thank you, Reverend Arthur. If you don't know that throwback, please look up Reverend Arthur's talk on YouTube, because he totally gave us a feminist manifesto on Mary and Martha. But in the book, or in the class, basically it was how to look at the Bible from a metaphysical standpoint. What does that even mean? Meaning that all of the characters in the Bible are you, or me, or us. And the cool thing about Esther is that all of the characters in the Bible are psychological parts of us. So I'm going to break it down for you. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give a shout out to Reverend Norm, because from Colorado Springs. He was my teacher. And what he did was he gave us a framework. And I'm going to give you the framework really quickly. And y'all can always shout at me later, and I'll actually email you on how to do this. So when you take either a story or a chapter and you want to break it down into metaphysical, here's some steps that you can use to do it. First off, what's the theme? Go ahead and write down what you think the theme is after you've read it. And then write down who the characters are. After that, then you decide which character you are. Like I said, in Esther, they're all parts of you. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Then, what's the stumbling block? What obstacle are we working on through this story? What is being asked of you? What's holding you back from doing it? So that's a framework that you can use to work through Bible stories that may help you dig a little deeper into them. The last part is, how would you use this in a sermon? If you're going to be a minister, go for it. How would you use this in a sermon? All right. What's the theme of Esther? I asked the question like I'm expecting an answer, but I'm going to give you a minute to think about it, or a moment. What's the story of Esther? Esther is a young Jewish woman who is an orphan, who is being raised by her uncle, Mordecai. And this is during the diaspora, meaning they are not living in the Holy Land. They are not living in the Jewish homeland. They are living wherever this king is. And this king has a party, and he requests that his wife, the Queen Vashti, show up wearing the royal crown. Now the question becomes, was she only supposed to show up wearing the crown? Think about it for a minute. Because she declined. Because she didn't want to show up in his banquet, so he got mad. Which I understand, to a point. But the king turned to his advisors in the banquet and said, well, I told her to show up and she didn't, so what do I do? And his advisors said, banish her. Banish her from your sight. Okay. So the king did, which meant he no longer had a queen. So some time passes, and he goes, wow, she was really beautiful, and I really miss her. Maybe I should get a new queen. At no time did he ever think, maybe I should forgive her and bring that queen back, but we'll let that go for a moment. So his advisors, he goes to his advisors and says, now what? And his advisor said, well, there's a bunch of young, beautiful women out there. Let's just gather them all up, bring them to the palace, and then you can choose.
Beauty contest.
Effectively, yes, it's a beauty contest. You're right. You're right. It is a beauty contest. That was Jeffrey, by the way. And so the call went out. Now, Mordecai knew that Esther was young and beautiful. She was also kind and generous. And he knew that she was going to get picked. Now, one of the interesting things about this story, and I brought mine with you so you could see it. This is my go-to Bible. It is the HarperCollins Study Bible. I bought it when I was a student of anthropology at Auburn University. And what I love about it is it has maps and historical commentary. And one of the things that this book pointed out when I reread the story was there was nothing that distinguished the Jewish people from the people that they were living among. Apparently, there was not a difference in diet, there was not a difference in dress. They were similar enough that they basically passed unnoticed, which, if you've read any history at all, is kind of a big deal. So Mordecai prepares Esther and says, honey, you're going to go. They're going to pick you. This is what you need to do. So he was right. She got picked. And then there's a period of isolation where all of the women are living in the harem for their cosmetic treatments. The woman in the room laughed because she knows what that means. They lived in the harem to make sure they weren't pregnant. That's what their cosmetic treatments were. There may be more to it, but when the king called for each woman, then they were allowed to take whatever they wanted to go meet with the king. So when Esther's time finally came up, she went to the head of the harem. His name is Haggai, and says, what do you think I should take? So right there, she started off with, let me go to the person who knows the king the best and ask him what I can do to be safe and to please him. So that's what she took in when she met with the king. And she quickly became the king's favorite. So of course Mordecai's worried about his niece. So he takes up a post at the gate. They don't specify which gate. While he's sitting there at the gate, he hears two of the other gate guards who are unhappy with the king for whatever reason plot to assassinate the king. And he goes and says, no. So he reports them, and the plot is foiled, and the king is safe, and nothing happens. Now, let me go back and tell you a little bit about some of the characters that I've already told you about. If these characters are all psychological parts of us, the king represents the will. Did you notice at the beginning of the story how the king was constantly talking to his advisors? And his advisors were giving him some kind of weird advice? Mordecai represents spiritual truth. You'll see. Now, if you dig into the story, which I'm not going to, but I'm just going to go ahead and give you a heads up, and let me cite sources here. Charles Fillmore wrote a book on the metaphysical Bible. It's basically a metaphysical dictionary. You can look up all of these big characters, and Charles Fillmore tells you what they represent. So I didn't make this up. I got this out of a book. It's a fascinating book, and it is definitely a good way to dig into any of the Bible stories. The two would-be assassins represented the belief in luck and superstition that was foiled by spiritual truth. So think about that. Now we have two other characters that we haven't really talked about. We've talked briefly about Esther, and I'm going to let you make up your own mind for right now what she stands for. But now I need to tell you about Haman, who you don't see in the first half of the book. And then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's the major advisor to the king. He has now become the major director of the will. And when you hear some of the things that he's done, you're kind of like, oh. So let me lay it on the table for you. Haman represents ego. Okay? So that may help you with some of the things that he's about to do. He's coming and going, and he's big man on campus, and he, pretty much whatever he wants, the king will let him do. And then he's walking through the gate one day, and Mordecai doesn't bow. And Haman got really upset about that. Now, the book isn't clear how Haman knows that Mordecai is a Jew. That's one of the things that they said in there in the notes is, and you read the book and you're not. But all of a sudden, Haman is really ticked off at every single Jew. At no time does Haman ever go and lower himself to speak to Mordecai to ask him why he didn't bow. And Haman then paints every single Jew with one brush. Does that sound like ego? So now he's ticked off and he goes to the king and he says, well, I'm really unhappy and I really want to do this. And basically I want to slaughter every Jew in your kingdom because they have different laws. So they don't live by the laws of the kingdom. We don't know how long the Jews have been living in this kingdom, but I'm kind of sure that if they've lived there for as long as it sounds like they have, they do live by the laws of the king. But the king didn't think about that. The king went, oh, okay, you can do whatever you want. Now, before I get too far into this, let me remind you, ego does have a place. Okay? And I will remind you that again. So Haman says, and the king gives him a ring. So Haman writes a letter and says, on this specific date, and I believe it was the 13th, we're going to purge the Jews and take all of their stuff. That's just horrifying. And nobody said anything. And Mordecai heard about it, and Mordecai went, oh my God. He probably literally did say that. And then he goes to his niece, Esther. And he says, you're in danger, girl. And so are your people. And her first response is, well, what do you want me to do? And he says, save us. How? Go to the king and ask. But the king hasn't called for me, and if I show up without him calling for me, he will kill me. If you don't save us, it will come from some other source. But perhaps you have been put in this position to be that source. Trust and have faith. He doesn't say that in the story, but you hear it. And she says, okay, I'm going to go pray, and I would ask you and all of our people to pray. So everybody goes and prays. And she shows up in an appearance. Now, there's this cool thing that the king will do. If you show up and you weren't expected, he'll hold out his scepter to you if he's okay with you being there. So she shows up. Now, I did tell you she was already one of his favorites, or if not his favorite. So he was like, oh, what are you doing here? He holds out his scepter. He saved her. And he says, what do you want? Up to half of my kingdom. And she says, come to a banquet. And the king's like, all right. She comes another time and asks, and this time when she comes back, she asks for Haman. So the king and Haman are going to come to a banquet. The first one she puts on, which is very important to the story. But first, I need to go back and tell you that Haman keeps coming in and out of this gate, and Mordecai keeps not bowing, and Haman just keeps getting madder and madder. And so he goes to his family and says, he just won't bow. Now, at no time does he ever go to Mordecai and go, why won't you bow? But he goes to his family, and his family says, well, just, you've got the ear of the king. Why don't you just have him hung? So he builds a gallows. Now, after this appearance of Esther, the king can't sleep. So he goes, and he thinks, what's the most boring thing that I could possibly do that would probably put me to sleep? Oh, I know. I'll have somebody read me the records. Okay. So he gets somebody to read him the records, and they're reading him the records, and they get to that assassination plot. And he goes, wait, what? Was this person ever rewarded? And he says, no, it wasn't noted in here. Okay. So he says, all right, fine. I'll get the first person I see. We'll come up with a reward for this person. So Haman happens to walk into the room at this point. And ironically, Haman was walking in to ask the king to hang Mordecai. And the king says, hey, what would you do to reward somebody that had done something really amazing for you? And Haman goes, oh, I've done something really amazing. He's going to reward me. So he immediately says, well, this is what I want. I want to be dressed, well, he doesn't say I, but he says that I think that what we should do for this person is dress them in the finest royal robes and parade them around the city on the finest royal steed, proclaiming how amazing they are. And the king goes, that's a fantastic idea. Go do this for Mordecai. And Haman goes, what? But the king has spoken. So he goes and has it carried out. And then he goes back to the family and he goes, you know what? I think I'm really in trouble here. So he shows up to the king and goes to the banquet with Esther. And again, the king says, what is your request? Up to half of my kingdom. And Esther, and I'll bet you anything, knowing this woman, she looked Haman straight in the eye and said, there's a plot to kill all of my people. Please save my people. And the king went, what? There's a plot to kill all of your people? Absolutely, we rescind the order. Make it so. Who did this? Now everybody, all the eyes in the room look at Haman. And Haman goes, Okay, so let me remind you that the ego is not a bad thing. But in this story, who is Esther? Love. Esther is love. She is willing to sacrifice her life to save her people. She is willing to step in front of the will, between the will and the ego, and say, this is not okay. And Mordecai is spiritual truth, who has been guiding the will. And the ego, Haman, was freaking out because he was losing control of the will, of which he should have never had in the first place. Because love and spiritual truth don't seek to control the will. They seek to guide the will. But ego seeks control. So, since we're in 1500 BC, or 5000 BC, I'm going to say, who's driving your chariot? All right? Are you letting Haman drive your will? Are you letting your ego run away with you? Because one of the other things that I found really fascinating that was pointed out in the commentary of this story is that the gallows that Haman built was built of ego's flaws. So when you let the ego run the will, you are building your own gallows. But when you let spiritual love and truth guide, then you are not building gallows for yourself. So, one of the things that was pointed out was that the ego is responding to the growing power of spirit, because spirit will not bow down before ego. Ego sees spirit as a threat and is looking for a way to remove that threat. But the truth is, spirit and love are not a threat to the ego. They want to coexist with the ego. They just don't want the ego in the driver's seat. So, what does that have to do with them? Am I going to tie this together, or am I going to do like Jesse and just completely run away from it? No. I came up with a acronym when I aggravated my knee. I'm not going to say I injured my knee. I'm not claiming that. Of RICE. When you're dealing with any injuries, one of the ways that you can help to work on that is to RICE them. Rest, ice, compression, and elevate. And I thought, well, that's spiritual if I've ever heard it. And since this month's theme is life strategies, let's RICE our ego. Let's rest our ego. What did Esther do when Mordecai came and said, hey, I need you to sacrifice yourself? That's not what he said. But there was the potential. She rested. And when she rested, she went into prayer. Now, what could I stand for? Because it doesn't have to be ice. It could be, because half the time we do need to put our ego on ice. Because sometimes it's not about us. Actually, probably about 98% of the time, it's not about us. So we can ice our ego. But we can also take an interest. If the king had stopped to learn about the people in his land, he might have recognized Esther for what she was. Take an interest in them. Learn about them. Celebrate the differences in them. Now, I have another I word for you just in case. Integrity. Are your actions in spiritual integrity? If they are taken in love, they are in integrity. Just one more I word for you. All right? So I changed the C to compassion. Now, if you've watched me on my daily readings, I like to end whatever it is that I've said by asking you to do something loving for yourself, do something kind for yourself, do something compassionate for yourself every day. And sometimes compassion is something you yourself need, and sometimes doing something compassionate for yourself is to do something compassionate for another. And compassion does not have to be a big thing. Sometimes compassion is just going and taking a nap because you have done enough. And the last one is elevate. Well, there's nothing I can do with that word, because that is the point of this teaching. The point of science of mind is to elevate your thoughts to a higher place, to a higher love, to recognize that there is no them. There is only one. And when you're coming from that elevated place, and you are striving to bring everyone to that elevated place, well, then you've truly rised. So much of history is us against them. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. Us against them. If we could let go of them and recognize that there is only one, history would look a little bit different. So I'm going to end by telling you, Ernest doesn't believe in them. And the proof is in all of his books, but this one in particular. On September 25th, I know that life gives me according to my faith. Therefore, I elevate my faith. I lift my mind. On September 24th, I recognize that the divine spirit flows through me is really the presence of love. On September 22nd, this teaching calls for a recognition of life in everything, of spirit operating everywhere. He taught that we must recognize this spirit in everyone. He being Jesus. Ernest does not cite his sources. On September 18th, today, I know that my spirit is quickened as I recognize the same spirit in others. And if you want to really get into it, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but go read September 20th. Because in that one, the whole point of that one is there is one spirit diffused throughout humanity. There is no them. So I'm going to give you one last quote from an astronaut. This is Chris Hadfield. From orbit, we see the repeated patterns of human settlement and civilization, and inevitably start to sense that each of us inherently want the same things out of life: joy, grace, time, stability to think, better opportunities for our children, laughter, someone to love. The precept of us and them is one that is taught. It is not the fundamental reality. There is no them. There is only us. And in the knowing of that, I'm going to step back and know the way we start all of our treatments. There is one life, one power, one presence, one love. And each and every one of us is a part of that one life. We make up that greater whole that is so much bigger than us. We bring this amazing quilt of life to life, to love. And so in knowing that, I am knowing that we are resting, that we are developing and culturing that interest in each other, that we are showing compassion to ourselves and to everyone, that when we look in each other's eyes, we see the divine spirit looking back at us, and that we feel that love flowing through us. And I know this with all of the gratitude in my being. And I relax and release and know that it is so because I have elevated my spirit and I'm bringing y'all with me. And so it is.
Thank you, Reverend Lisa. That was wonderful. So I'm going to pray, and I'm going to ask you to pray, and I'm going to ask all our people to pray. Let's do that now as we close together. The weather's about to break. The long, hot summer is winding down. Now we are officially into autumn, and the cool breezes will blow, they say, tomorrow. Let that be a sign unto us about elevating our thought, about releasing the past, releasing the divisions that have seemed to separate us, that we're all made up. All reactions, emotional reactions, our unhealed stuff. So we'll see ourselves as Spirit sees us, which is whole, complete, and perfect. We'll see this world as Spirit sees it, which is the experience that it's having by means of each of us. There's a place where nothing has ever been wrong. There's a place where nothing ever could be. And it's that place that we enter into in our spiritual work, in our treatment, in our meditation. And it is from that place that I speak this word about each of us having this experience together in this room and online today. There's peace. There's stillness. There's gratitude. Elevating themselves, each of these aspects, in the heart of every one of us. For this knowing, for this sweet time together, I am so deeply grateful. Thank you, infinite presence of life, creator of us all, and so it is. Say with me now, something wonderful is happening through me.
Something wonderful is happening through me.
I feel it in my body.
I feel it in my body.
I feel it in my mind.
I feel it in my mind.
I feel it in everything I am.
I feel it in everything I am.
I choose it. I trust it. I use it. And I love it. And so it is.